recording with the wonderful and one and only Mr. Leo Zagami, who has been on here several times before. We've discussed your books, Confessions of Illuminati. I think we've done 4, 5, 6, and 7. We haven't done the first 3 yet. The links to all those will be in the description. And I see over your shoulder part 8, and I cannot recommend part 7 enough. I've recommended it to a ton of people. You are clairvoyant. You can see this stuff from a mile away. But with that, Mr. Zagami, please introduce yourself to the new listeners.
Hello, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be with you and with your viewers that have followed, like you said, my works of literature in such a detailed way. So we have actually covered quite a lot with you in the past, but we have never really covered show business. And this book is mainly about art, about what is supposed to be art. Sadly, is not any longer in the majority of cases. This book is about music, is about cinema, is about what happened in the last 100 years, how they have used both TV also later on, because TV is later invention, but this book covers from the very start cinema. It talks about how music was also manipulated, frequencies have been manipulated to in a way not only indoctrinate the masses to the arrival of the Antichrist, but also to make them less and less let's say in tune with what these forms of art were supposed to, maybe especially music, which of course has had some great artists that have delivered some works that literally brings us close to God. You know, when you hear some classic works of music by people like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, you really feel in tune with God. However, it's also true that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was an Illuminati. So what went wrong between Mozart back then and Beyonce or Jay-Z today, or what we have seen at the Grammy Awards? Well, we have a lot to cover, of course, so I will leave it to you on how you want to districate yourself through this book, which of course has a lot of information. It's almost 700 pages. I have managed to leave this book to a relatively low price, because I mean $23 for a almost 700 pages book is definitely a very low price, but my intention is to spread it as wide as possible. And so for the first few months of me publishing this book, I've decided that for the first few months I will keep it at the lowest price possible, something which I did also in Italy, but in Italy it came out a month earlier, and now I have I'm forced, because I mean today's price for producing a book has gone really up. So take advantage of it for the moment, and also remember that this book has also over 1,000 citation footnotes that help the reader in eventually also going in a journey of self-discovery, of further study into these topics. The work that I have done this time definitely is unusual, because we are not really talking about who is supposed to be in what kind of order, Illuminati, alleged memberships, or human sacrifice. This book is based on facts, and already the facts are pretty fascinating, and they start from the moment in which we open the book, and I explain in my introduction how I came to live in Palm Springs, and Palm Springs, who once upon a time used to be, and still is for many Hollywood actors, a sort of 2-hour away paradise that they could use whenever they wanted, because they had this 2-hour rule in the film industry, and they couldn't really go much further than Palm Springs, but at the same time, here in Palm Springs, you had, of course, people like Frank Sinatra, people like Elvis Presley living, and so many people who have, of course, also characterized in some way this city. Not last Liberace, which made the whole city very camp in a way later on. So I wanted to explain the importance for me of being here, the fact that nowadays I've been closer to really also the source of my information for doing this book, because I started really studying this topic regarding Hollywood and the Illuminati and the New World Order and how it fitted in this whole thing 10 years ago, when I eventually came out with my first book on this topic in Italy in 2015, 14, between 2000, I think 2014. And it was something that I did coming here in California, visiting California for 3 months, going in and out of Hollywood often, meeting with the film producers, a lot of people, also thanks to Sean Stone, who gave me a hand, the son of Oliver Stone. And so it's been a great experience for me. Already the first book, it was an eye-opener to actually see if there was some facts, behind the legend, the myth, everything, until you don't really touch it with your hand, until I see it with my eyes. I'm one of those people who don't really believe only in what they read on the internet or what they read on a book. I wanted to live it firsthand. And I lived a lot of things firsthand in show business because, as you know, I was, before becoming a writer and investigative journalist, I was a record producer, I was a DJ, I was somebody who was involved professionally with the music business for many, many years. And before that, I also had studied acting with my grandmother, who I dedicate this book to because she was, in a way, the person who introduced me to the secrets of show business, gave me my first Aleister Crowley book, made me understand what was really behind this facade, this illusion that, of course, they were trying to feed us through the screens of both TV and cinema. Now, in this book, I go very much in depth in explaining how the actual Hollywood business was born over 100 years ago, with people that were, though, from a specific ethnic or cultural and religious background, because this became the playground. Hollywood became the playground of the Sabbatean Frankists, who are a specific heresy within Judaism, which I already, as you know, talked about in volume 7. I explained also in detail in volume 4. And I'm now able to also explain to our readers how there is all these misconceptions also on the figure of the Jew in Hollywood. The Jewish person in Hollywood is seen as like the guy who dominates everything. And at times, because of this, you have also anti-Semite kind of feelings. Not that at times they can be from inside the actual industry, rarely, because nobody wants to expose themselves against such thing. But it becomes also for me important to correct when there is a wrong kind of perspective. In this case, Kanye West gave me also the input with what he said, with the way he denounced the whole Jewish world. And I wanted to correct him. I wanted to say, no, there is actually an heresy within the Jewish world, but there is many heresies within the Christian world. There is many heresies in the Islamic world. Heresies and people who conduct themselves in a sectarian way are present in all the religions, not only in the Abrahamic faiths. It's something that is typical, that happens. Now, when it comes to Judaism, it has a particularly strong connotation because of the influence that the Jewish community has had very much, especially when it comes to show business. And so for me to explain a little bit further the Sabbatean Frankists, the way that all this also meets up with Telema, with Aleister Crowley, with another, we can't even call it an heresy because it was a brand new philosophy, religion that Crowley said he was the prophet of. That became, however, very much the holy book, the volume, the sacred book of the law of all these people involved in this way of life in Hollywood. So the book of the law was transmitted to Aleister Crowley. Channeling, basically, it's something that happens. We know that people channel things. In this case, Crowley had done a ritual, and suddenly he found his wife channeling this book in 1904. This book, for a number of years, Crowley put aside, and eventually between 1909 and 1910, he not only took out of, apparently he had left it somewhere, and he just kind of revamped it when he found out that this was a relevant text for him. However, 1909 and 1910 are also the years in which he also did the ritual in Northern Africa to invoke the demon of the abyss, Coronzo. 1910 was also the year in which he performed publicly the Eloise's rites in London and Caxton Hall. It was the first time that a magician did a public ceremony in that way, and also such a extraordinary way, because he was cutting himself like Marilyn Manson, taking peyote like a rock star. And so I wanted to explain that really this whole problem is born out of that period of time in which also in 1909, D.W. Griffith, Freemason and filmmaker, will land in what will later become Hollywood. And that is the moment in which Hollywood is born. He will film in Old California, which is his first movie. Then later on, he will film other movies, especially in 1915, The Birth of a Nation, dedicated to the KKK, first film to ever be screened at the White House, which paraded the KKK as heroes. And then you have in 1916 Intolerance, which also talks about Babylon. And so all this scenography of Babylon, the gates of Babylon, the elephants of Ishtar, everything was portrayed. And of course, it was shown to the people in a way without any graphic design, the graphic tricks, because you needed to have 10,000 actors to do certain scenes, and that's what he did. He called 10,000 actors for an incredible movie. That scenography then stayed there for years, and it's the scenography that inspired the myth of the Hollywood Babylon. And later on in 1991, Kenneth Anger, who made really launched this myth with his two books, Hollywood Babylon 1 and 2, which also talked about really what was behind Hollywood, what was behind Hollywood, all the scandals that really were behind the illusion that Hollywood was all this beauty and innocence, when it was in reality far from it. And so Kenneth Anger is a member of the OTO. Kenneth Anger is a film director of underground films, for those who don't know him. But in reality, those underground films are rituals. And amongst these rituals, there is, of course, the invocation of my demon brother, Lucifer Rising, films dedicated to the birth of the Antichrist, and films that saw the participation of people who ended up in the Manson family. Manson family, who of course is connected to Charles Manson, who himself, as you know, wanted to become a musician, wanted to in some way join the Beach Boys' success, was infatuated with becoming a rock star, something that he never managed. But at the same time, he was also somebody who was involved with the lodge of the OTO called the Solar Lodge, The OTO in itself didn't really constitute itself formally and officially here in the United States with the Grand Lodge until 1977. So everything that came before that was people that at times were doing their own thing in separate lodges around. Of course, at the time of Crowley, the first lodges that sprang up here in the United States, the most relevant ones were in California and especially in Hollywood, because that's where they performed the first Gnostic Mass. So just a second, I want to do something here.
You're good. You're good. Yeah, for everybody listening, I'll put the links to all of Leo's books in the description. I mean, I said it before, I can't recommend Volume 7 enough. It is the most comprehensive, like total.
Yes.
Oh, just scared me. I just jumped.
It was simply that I had to go and sort out a little bit of conditions.
You're good.
Because we are living here in the desert, and we had the snow until coming in unusually in Southern California, as you know, a lot of bad weather, but now the sun is kind of resurfacing, so I had to just put it on. Like I said, Volume 8 is a book that wants to bring you from the very early roots of this Hollywood creation, which is also occult, as well as the roots of rock music, which comes from rhythm and blues, from blues, which itself is said to be the result of a pact with the devil. The famous musicians who met at the crossroads, signing their soul to the devil for some talent. And all this goes beyond the simple myth or legend. There is evidence. There is then a big figure, of course, that we all know about, which is Elvis Presley. Like I said, he used to live here in Palm Springs, and Elvis Presley was the first guy to really experiment with the audience, this frenetic new love for a star, for a rock star, for somebody who became, of course, almost like a living god for the people who were following him. And at times all this was, though, created artificially. I mean, when in the case of the Beatles, for example, they arrived here in America, and suddenly we have those scenes that still people talk about, girls tearing, you know, their hair apart. They were like screaming, crying. Now, like I said, like I wrote in my book, this was often very well crafted and arranged by not only the record labels, but also by the military industrial complex behind the record labels. For me, the moment in which I started this book, the first thing I had to explain was the connection that goes between the big record companies, the big movie companies, the big studios, and the military industrial complex. A connection that starts right from the beginning when it comes to Hollywood, because from the movie I cited earlier, Birth of a Nation, that was the first collaboration with the American military, and later on the Pentagon will establish a permanent office in Hollywood. I talk about that also in my book. So these are things that are connected with the military industrial complex, but also with certain families that also had a lot of influence. The big families like the Rockefeller, the Rothschild, and so on, that had a big influence in not only the banking system as we all imagine, but also in the TV, the birth of television, in the birth of radio, RCA. I mean, we are talking right from the start. The Rockefeller Foundation had a say in all this. So I think that people need to realize all these connections, and at the same time they need to realize that this is not only I mean, it's called From the Rise of the Antichrist to the Sound of the Devil and the Great Reset. So of course we have my own approach, which is fundamentally Christian, but also is an approach that nobody can debunk, even if they are not Christian, because here we are laying down simply facts. facts that bring us to also a radical transformation of what Hollywood was when they brought into this whole after the war in the 50s and 60s, they brought into the whole Hollywood business the LSD phenomenon that manifested in a time in which modern Satanism was starting to move from those intellectual approach that we had with Aleister Crowley, with other people who were still like not openly Satanist, as Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey became the showman of Satanism for Hollywood and for Satanism in general, with his Satanic Bible later on, with the foundation of the Church of Satan in 1966, with his alleged participation to Rosemary's Baby. We have basically somebody who made out of the hyper-transgression, nihilism, and materialism his way of life, just like Aleister Crowley. But the difference is, the difference with somebody like Aleister Crowley is that he was trying to be more reachable by the common folk, more understandable by the common folk. I mean, a person with not so much culture will probably dismiss Crowley as a bunch of confused, not understandable stuff, because they would simply not be able to interpret what Crowley was trying to do. But instead, with the Church of Satan, it's clear. What he's trying to do is to push Satan at the center of modern society and to make him more acceptable. So you couldn't really criticize Anton LaVey or the Church of Satan simply because under the freedom of religion, they masqueraded themselves as very innocent and at times claiming even a morality that the Christians didn't have in certain topics, which is completely ridiculous. Something that later on was this way of bringing Satanists to the masses was, of course, picked up later on by the Satanic Temple, which is also described in my book as the third phase of modern Satanism, because we have the second phase in the middle of the 70s with the Michael Aquino, which is still a very intellectual phase, because, I mean, the Temple of Set is not as openly satanic as the Church of Satan, but at the same time, retains a lot of the elements of Telema, of Aleister Crowley, that in some way Michael Aquino wanted to propose Satanism for people from the military intelligence, from medium high kind of level, of academic level, and that's how the Satanic Temple then manifested instead later on 10 years ago, because the Church of Satan was seen as having been overly commercial and having basically become a joke for Satanists, because it was just like, okay, you pay your yearly fee, you get a card, and that's it, you are part of the club. It's like a Mickey Mouse club. Instead, the Temple of Set was overly elitarian, elitist. You know, he went to present the Temple of Set on Oprah Winfrey in the 80s and 90s. He was guested at the height of the satanic ritual abuse scare on TV, with also the daughter of Anton LaVey, who became later on Zina LaVey became the head of for a period of time of this Temple of Set. But it wasn't enough to manifest what instead became 10 years ago the idea of Lucian Greaves, which is to basically create also a lobby that can lobby politicians, that can promote things like an abortion clinic, promote under the disguise of Satanism, or present a documentary that basically participate to a documentary that will be presented at the Sundance Festival, and literally work hand in hand with the politics of the Democratic Party. This is what the Satanic Temple is today, when they also show up with their Baphomet statue, with the little children, and also when they prey on children literally by forcing schools to accept the satanic after-school project that they have put together. But this is the last phase of modern Satanism. It's the acceptance, is the lobbying, is the fact that now they are not scared anymore of who they are. And that would not have happened without Anton LaVey, of course, starting this process. Anton LaVey, like I explain in my book, was somebody who came from the Crowley milieu, let's say the milieu, that the OTO milieu of Berkeley, the people who later on will have established the OTO in America as we know it, were hanging out with Anton LaVey, but Anton LaVey didn't see the philosophy of Telema as effective as its own. Instead, we see in recent years that Telema is always there in Hollywood, is present, it continues to be present, and continues to be also appreciated by artists, actors like James Franco, and who very much are openly endorsing it, even arriving to the point of doing rituals for a video with Kenneth Anger, for a music video, also public ritual that he said that he didn't participate at the end, but that's a bit doubtful, in Venice Beach in 2012, wanting to mimic what Crowley was trying to do with his public ritual in Caxton Hall. In a place like Venice Beach that is connected in a way to rebellion, to rock music, through the Doors, for Jimmy Page, who himself was connected to the military industrial complex through his father, but also through Aleister Crowley, because he was a great fan of it. So as you can see, the rise of the Antichrist has definitely seen the permanent fixture of Aleister Crowley in all the various places where art is made, but especially where modern art is made. Crowley has been definitely regarded very highly, especially when it comes to electronic music. In my book, I have a whole section dedicated to the very early rave scene, how certain groups were influenced by the secret society known as the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was founded by Genesis P-Orridge. Genesis P-Orridge was somebody very close to the head of the OTO, the current head of the OTO, and William Breeze. And at the same time, he was somebody who wanted to break the boundaries of everything. He went into a transformation of his own body, wanting to become like his own wife, borrowing body parts, becoming a woman. He died now a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, during the pandemic. But Genesis P-Orridge is definitely a very influential figure. I had the opportunity to meet him with my grandmother, because Genesis P-Orridge was connected also to Brian Geisen and William Burroughs, creators of the cut-up technique, aside from being very famous figures of the beat milieu, of that beat hotel, which launched the beatniks, which launched a whole way of life here in America, that then had the follow-up with the hippie generation. And that's why people have the erroneous idea that all these things were, like Woodstock, like these concerts that came at the end of the 60s, that were truly acts of revolution, and that the people were really rebelling, and that this flower power was really genuine. It was complete nonsense. Behind the scenes, in San Francisco in 1966, you had the Church of Satan. Yes, you had, of course, the flower power out there, but then you had the dark side. And in fact, eventually that dark side of the Age of Aquarius surfaced with the Charles Manson murders, conducted by his his infamous family, by his sect that he had created in a way. So there was all these communes with people, they used to live with each other in a hippish way, but a lot of them were also infiltrated by gurus, by sects, by various Satanists and occultists that were using, of course, these communes where people were hanging around together, living together. I mean, the heir to the OTO in America was Carl Kerner, was somebody who Aleister Crowley trusted very much. And he kind of like was letting, in a way, the OTO maybe dying, because the interest of Crowley with the OTO after, of course, his death, he left this guy in charge of everything. But then this guy wasn't really interested in carrying it so much on. And then what happened was, though, that at one point, Charles Manson arrived into the equation. Charles Manson stole apparently some of the old Crowley paraphernalia, which was left in the home of this of the wife of this person who died, who was the head of the OTO. So imagine there's all these connections with the occult that a lot of people don't know about, and that I hope that the people will learn more about with my book. I had a lot of people complimenting me about this book, because I have made it in a way that people can really trust the information that I'm putting together. And I hope that they understand that it took years and years of work to put together something like that. So I hope that it's appreciated. But like I said, what happened was of course, depicted also the rise of the Antichrist through a film, which is Rosemary's Baby. It is really an account of how an Antichrist can be brought to this planet. No? It was a fictional account, but there was some truth to it. And that truth was depicted in an underground film, which was called Lucifer Rising, which this guy called Bobby Beausoleil stole, brought to the Death Valley here in Southern California, buried, and then the leftovers of that film, Kenneth Anger made out of those leftovers an underground film, which you can still find online, which is called Invocation of My Demon Brother. Now, we're not talking about any kind of film. I mean, apart from Bobby Beausoleil, who later was arrested because he participated to the murders, the Manson family murders, against, I think, a guitarist in LA who they tortured and murdered. But the thing is that the film had the music of Mick Jagger, was filmed in the former Russian embassy in San Francisco. There was on the stage Anton LaVey, Kenneth Anger, doing rituals to invoke the arrival of this Antichrist, also using the energy, the negative energy that was being triggered by the war in Vietnam. The film, like I said, was stolen, the Lucifer Rising. It became another film, but then he didn't stop from doing Lucifer Rising. He actually went on, and in my book, I explain how the film took a few years, but in the end, thanks also to the help of Jimmy Page, who guested for a few years in his basement, Kenneth Anger, this film was eventually made. And it's 45 minutes, 40 minutes. I mean, it's a very short film, but it's done very much with details that take ages to put together in the way that it's more of a ritual than actually a film. And the significance of it, of course, becomes clear to the people who know about certain things that I personally try to explain in this book. So I at the beginning of this book, enjoy the ride, because life is full of bumps, and enjoy the ride also, like Riders of on the Storm, which is the title of the sixth album of The Doors. A lot of these artists later on ended up dying at a very early age. They have also this diabolical synchronicity with the number 27, with the age 20, they reached 27 years of age, and they seem to have some kind of synchronicity that is connected to it. So I think that I gave you very much an introduction to all of the book. If you want to go to any specific parts, please ask, because the importance of this book is laid out in every chapter, and there is 7 chapters. We talk also about the last chapter. I talk about artificial intelligence and the Hollywood metaverse, which is also an interesting topic, as well as the topic of trying to identify a possible candidate to the Antichrist, which is an almost impossible task, because I don't think we will ever know who he is until it's way too late for all of us.
If you had to guess, what would the Antichrist be? Would it be a human? Would it be advanced AI? Would it be an alien intelligence?
Well, like I said, starting from volume 6.66, and then after with volume 7, I made it very clear. We have definitely an AI candidate to the figure of Cyber Satan, but then we have a human candidate for the figure of the Antichrist. They are two, I mean, it's a different thing to see the Antichrist coming to the earth alone, and the Antichrist instead being raised by a system, which we have seen also working within show business. And that's really why I say, from the rise of the Antichrist to the sound of the devil and the Great Reset, the fact that I tried to explain how this rise of the Antichrist was aided by the music, by the certain music, certain cinema, how cinema was made to literally create an America which after the war was also a positive force. No, the cinema became positive force when it was pushing for the American dream. It became a negative force once the LSD element started to get inserted, which of course offered us also some great artistic moments, because of course when we see films like Apocalypse Now or films like Easy Rider, films that are connected to the consumption of this drug, we see that definitely it made things different, less boring, more colorful. Films became different. And of course, we see also from the moment of the rise of psychedelia, end of the 60s, then we have the decline, but we have then in the 80s the rise of another subject which everybody starts talking about already from the end of the 70s onwards. The subject becomes very much promoted by Steven Spielberg, and I'm talking about UFOs. So it's almost like the subject of UFOs, it's triggered after there is a preparation stage, no? And in fact, people don't know this, but even Charles Manson with the solar the solar lodge of the OTO, they seem to have had a UFO experience at one point, which is not very well known, but it is. It seems like a lot of people are having used all these drugs and everything, having opened these doorways, these paths to the unknown, a little bit like they're doing nowadays with ayahuasca. In Hollywood, the consumption of psychedelics is coming back in fashion. It might not be anymore maybe peyote, it might rather be ayahuasca, but actually even LSD is coming back into fashion. And it seems like they're really pushing it like the new thing for all these libtards, like, consume these drugs because they, like the latest thing I read was like, you should consume psychedelic mushrooms because maybe they will help you reset yourself and abandon your bad habits of smoking. So suddenly, you know, you are offered a psychedelic drug to stop smoking, to arrive to the point of resetting your system. I mean, it sounds like pretty weird, no? But I've seen so many of these articles in the last couple of years here in California, especially of this increase in returning to psychedelics, like it is a new old way that is being kind of taken back from the old times, of which, of course, in my book I go all the way to the roots, no, of all this. You have people like Cary Grant in the late 1950s who set out on a journey in search of his true self, using not only hypnosis and yoga, but beginning also using LSD. And then, of course, I talk about the guru of it all, of LSD, Timothy Leary, turn on, tune in, and drop out. The fact that he was really a very ambiguous figure, and there were other ambiguous figures that pushed LSD within the show business. There was a particular one which I talk about in my book called Alfred Matthew Hubbard. He died in 1982. He was considered the first pioneer in the use of LSD in the 1950s, but he also worked at various times for the Canadian Special Services, the United States Department of Justice, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which is the predecessor to the CIA. So, I mean, this guy wasn't so innocent, and he was the guy who went around and spread LSD and gave it to all the various doctors who were interested in experimenting with this drug. I mean, Hubbard supplied psychiatrists who gave LSD to people like Anais Nin, entertainers like Jack Nicholson, James Coburn, Lord Berkeley, and of course, like I said, Cary Grant, who even if he had this classic image on the screen, went on this journey of self-discovery using massive doses of LSD. I don't know why they are trying to do it now, if not for the simple fact that they were successful in transforming Hollywood and not transforming it for the better. Because yes, artistically speaking, we have to admit that, of course, some artists made some great art and music on LSD. I mean, just listen to Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd. You know, I mean, this is music that you couldn't do, and you know, it's just. But at the same time, the results of it all is now a society with the completely wrong values. The values have been completely changed. The conservative Hollywood of John Wayne, of other Freemasons that, by the way, they were all Freemasons. The Warner Brothers were Freemasons, and many others who really made Hollywood was transformed completely. And now we have a woke Hollywood with the completely distorted values. That's why in my book I start with great in-depth explanation of Walt Disney, of all the work that was carried also by Walt Disney against the communists. And then nowadays, instead, you have Walt Disney, which is a company that you can't go more woke than that. I mean, and that's why in this book I talk about what the scientists have done. I mean, and what Walt Disney has tried to do in recent years, which is openly promoting Satanism, openly promoting racism, openly promoting everything that is despicable and that is killing one day at a time the American dream. They are not really an institution like it used to be, because Walt Disney was an institution in America, and I mean, it was an American thing, you know, and nowadays it's not anymore. And this is also the problem with Hollywood. Hollywood had a central role in promoting Americanism, the American dream, and now has a central role in destroying it, because now they've been bought out by Chinese, by people from other countries who don't want America to prevail, or the American way to prevail. And that's why now the World Economic Forum promotes films that are in other languages rather than English. That's why when you put on Netflix, you go through the films, and out of 10 films, you might find that half of them are not even in English. They are with subtitles and stuff. And it's done deliberately because they want to kill the American way of life. They want to, of course, accuse everything that is white, English speaking, of racism, you know. Transform it, talk Spanish, do something else, bring in a Chinese, bring in somebody. I mean, it's all about basically equity. It's all about this woke ideology that continues to spread and ruin the art that is supposed to be making movies. And so I try to explain how the LSD in a way was probably used by the military industrial complex and the Frankfurt School of Thought, which also is very important to explain. I mean, the Frankfurt School of Thought is something that I also try to explain in my book, because it bears a lot of responsibilities. And how in that time, well, they were taking all this LSD, they were having festivals like Woodstock that were completely orchestrated and manipulated. They were pushing for the new left here in the US, for the Black Panthers, and all these groups that believed they had to fight for the conquest of civil rights. But in reality, just like now we have Black Lives Matter, Antifa, who are all managed by the same system, which is developed to destroy, like I said, American society, one step at a time. So I think I gave you a good, no?
No, it's beautiful. Could you, I guess, and then I'll grab the book and read it, and we'll do another episode. Could you describe or maybe go into the importance of, it seems to be almost like predictive programming, like you said, prep the world so that it's not
Well,
that
of course, a lot of people talk about predictive programming when it comes to Hollywood, because a lot of the films, a lot of the work, also not only when we talk about Hollywood these days, we have to talk about the movies, but we also have to talk about the TV series, because now a lot of stuff is really TV rather than cinema oriented. Even in Hollywood, everything is kind of cataloged for the small screen. The predictive programming is not like a main feature of my book, though I cite it, of course, just like I cite backmasking, which is the technique where which you use as an artist, especially when it came to vinyl, which you can then play reverse, simply turning the vinyl reverse, and you will hear the significance. Predictive programming is basically laying the seeds into your thought, into your unconscious of something that will happen in the future. And so in my book, I explain how, for example, you went from the Doctor Strangelove approach to atomic bombs to instead the modern approach, which was seen in films like recent editions of Terminator from 2009, where nuclear bombs simply explode with nonchalance in front of Los Angeles, and people continue doing whatever they're doing without giving it much thought, because it's kind of like the normalization of the atomic bomb. Now, this is kind of disturbing predictive programming if you think about it, because it means that they are trying to normalize something that they obviously think is going to happen sooner rather than later. And this is, of course, we have also seen predictive programming right in our faces with a comedian turned actor, comedian turned president, which is Zelensky. I explain in my book how he's connected to a Masonic order called the Order of Saint Stanislaus, which is itself also very powerful and strong. It basically was born between Poland and Ukraine in the 90s. It was relaunched. It was an order that pre-existed, of course, but it was relaunched as a Masonic order. And actually, the symbol of it became the symbol of the Ukrainian ground forces. And in 2011, 12 years ago, the Russian politicians within, the Ukrainian Russians, we can say Ukrainian politicians who were closer to Russia, let's say, wanted to outlaw all these Masonic organizations, especially this one, because they saw it as a clear threat to the sovereignty of Russia and the sovereignty of Ukraine, because they were working on the dependency of somebody else. Somebody else was dictating what they were doing, and it was, of course, NATO, together with the secret, especially the intelligence operatives from England, MI6. And I myself went to dinner, I think 1 or 2 times, with the Grand Master I met in a lodge in London of the Order of Saint Stanislaus. At the time, it was a gentleman called Steve Turner, and he was a member originally of Double Horizon, I think, the lodge Double Horizon, which is a known lodge of the United Kingdom Lodge of England. Then he had some problems with the United Kingdom Lodge of England because of all his activities that he was doing that were clearly not really Masonic, but rather intelligence activities. And though he managed to always stay within the lodges of Freemasonry, because at that point he simply got, I think, he got another charter from as a Freemason from a Grand Lodge here in the US. I mean, he was a strange character. I mean, I met him. He was a nice guy. I mean, to me, of course, he was a nice guy. We used to talk about Masonic stuff. We didn't used to talk about geopolitics with him, of course. But I've always remembered the fact that he gave me the first time I met this card. And it was a card that on one side it had, he was also the Grand Master at that point of an Italian Masonic obedience, and the International Order of Saint Stanislaus. And I still have, I think, back in Italy, this card. And I was like, what is this International Order of Saint Stanislaus? So I started to ask back then to get some information. And then I got the information that they were financed by George Soros, that they were basically working behind the Orange Revolutions. They were kind of spreading through Eastern Europe. So it wasn't only an intelligence project of, English, or the MI6, which is the Foreign Intelligence Service in England, the SIS, but it was also a project of George Soros. He was putting the money for all this. So the fact that these Russians, just before then in 2014, as you know, Zelensky and the people behind Zelensky, because Zelensky was still a comedian at that time, took over the show. And they went after the Russian territories, which are prevalently Russian. And that's when the war really started. It didn't start, as you know, I mean, we can say that formally it started a year or so ago, but it started already in 2014. And in this book, I wanted to explain how the Zelensky who goes in front of the Grammy Awards, Zelensky that goes in front of the people from the show business, and he himself is a product of all that. So, I mean, he was acting as a comedian in the role of the president for a number of years to normalize what he will be doing later on. It is predictive programming if you think about it, because you are preparing a whole nation. And when we go and see who was the producers behind that show, we see that, of course, they are linked to Soros, to an oligarch which is close to Soros. It's all people, his own production company with Zelensky, which is the wife. So, and all the people who are part of it became then his entourage, political entourage after that. So it's of course very clear what they were doing. And then you have the fact that Hollywood bows down to anything Zelensky says. We saw it with Sean Penn going there from the first days of the war, always present, filming everything, and then making this film that was presented recently in Berlin with the great applause and people, wow, Zelensky, what a great hero, what a great hero. And we know that that's not the case. I'm sorry to say, it's not the case. The guy is a crook. They are basically using all this for the Great Reset. Is another tool of the Great Reset, which we have already talked about in Volume 7. So everything that I explained in Volume 7 goes in line also with what I'm trying to explain here in Volume 8, which is basically the hidden roots of Hollywood, and also at the same time, not only the hidden roots of Hollywood, but also how the whole of show business has been always a tool in the hands of the system. Because, of course, you know, we listen to music, we view films, we would like to think that all this is innocent entertainment, but it never is. So I think that after you're going to read this book, like many other people, you will never see or listen to a song or see a movie or see a TV series or in the same way. There is also a number of Masonic lodges which are cited, which of course are connected to Hollywood, a number of sects of, and then there is of course people like Oprah Winfrey and the African American fixation with the Illuminati, which comes also from the very important role that the Prince Hall Freemasonry, which is a separate branch of Freemasonry, for those who don't know, created because in the regular lodges, when there was slavery, of course, Black people were not welcome in any regular lodge. And when these slaves started to become free, at that point, they wanted to be initiated, but they couldn't find an initiation here. So they went, the first Freemasons, they went abroad. And this Freemason in particular, Prince Hall created what is basically Prince Hall Freemasonry. And in this book, I explain how Freemasonry is connected with voodoo, especially the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. So aside from the very roots of this American abolitionist and leader in the free Black community in Boston, who died in 1807, who founded the Prince Hall Freemason, you have also those, the very much a big influence that Haitian voodoo through certain people like Martin de Pasqually and others who were at the very basis of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, they had in the evolution of this rite. And that's why you have the compass and the square also used in voodoo. You have certain Masonic symbolism in voodoo. And that is interesting because we know then that the voodoo and the animist religion have also participated in a way to the establishment of music here in the US, because gospel music was born out of singing the songs in the field, but singing them towards the Lord rather than towards their own deities, simply because they didn't want to be persecuted, but in reality they continued certain practices. And that's why voodoo, because then you have various ways of pronouncing it that then define where it comes from, which part. And here in America, it has a very important role. So because it's connected with music, because we can say that blues started linked with voodoo, then it was important for me to explain how much voodoo was important for people like Aleister Crowley. People don't know this, but in the Book of the Law of Aleister Crowley that we discussed earlier, which is the holy text, is considered as a sacred book of the modern Illuminati by all these people also in Hollywood. It literally says that voodoo is important in the first few lines. I mean, it says it clearly. Crowley states it, even if it's not supposed to be Crowley, because he's supposed to be channeling some deity, but they put forward the relevance of voodoo, and then also the relevance of voodoo can be seen in many aspects of black music in particular, as well as you can see in hip hop, for example, very much an influence of Freemasonry right from the start. How is it like the central figure in hip hop is called Master of Ceremony? The first rappers, Grandmaster Millie Meal, Grandmaster Flash, Grandmaster. So it's not even hiding there. Some of the great DJs that made house music known to the world, there is a couple of Puerto Ricans. They're called Masters at Work. It's not a coincidence, because they're all initiated into Prince Soul Freemasonry, and Prince Soul Freemasonry, on the contrary of mainstream white Freemasonry, was more underground, considered more underground, because they were not recognized by the other Masonic institution until fairly recently. The first, I think, 2 or 3 Grand Lodges to get recognized by the rest of the world Masonic establishment, the first 2 or 3 Prince Hall Masonic lodges were recognized in the early 2000s, so not so long ago. Before that, that's why for each state in the US, you have a Prince Hall Grand Lodge and you have a regular Grand Lodge. But nowadays, they recognize each other, because in the early 2000s, the United Grand Lodge of England said, well, we recognize Prince Hall Freemasonry as a regular, so now you better start recognizing it too in America, because this is about racism. Racism? You know, you just put that into the equation and then it becomes all... and the news, the scoop that I can give you for this episode, that we can close down with the scoop that I think will be important for all of you, is that this month, apparently on the 8th of March or after the 8th of March, we will have some big announcements made by the United Grand Lodge of England. Because the United Grand Lodge of England, for the first time, wants to recognize women in their lodges. Now, the United Grand Lodge of England has been very much criticized in the last few years, since they made this very weird statement of acceptance that if you are a woman that become a man or a man that become a woman, you can participate to their lodges. So gender, fluid, transsexuals, whatever. But this also puts a big problem in front of the United Lodge of England, because United Lodge of England at that point, if you accept a woman that become a man, then why don't you accept a woman? And it doesn't, you know. So apparently this month, the United Lodge of England is about to announce the recognition finally of women in the craft. However, I must also say that would have been a great thing, I would have said until a few years ago. But the problem is that whoever who knows the history of Freemasonry knows very well that the first people to accept women in Freemasonry were progressive liberal lodges and connected to the Grand Orient of France. The Grand Orient of France, a product of the Illuminati, a product also of the Jesuits later, became very much with the Grand Lodge de France, the form of Freemasonry that mostly influenced the Second Vatican Council. And in this book, I have a whole chapter also about the Second Vatican Council, because after the Second Vatican Council, the attitude towards music, towards the arts completely changed in the church. You were not anymore facing the altar in Latin with the classic mass in Latin, but you were using the common vernacular, whatever you want to call it, language. And now, in the last couple of years, the Pope is even going after the Latin mass. In my book, I explain how things change because the Second Vatican Council sanctioned the Masonic takeover of the church and also the Satanic takeover of the church. And at that point, you had Bob Dylan performing in front of John Paul II. Bob Dylan, who is clearly a Satanist by his own admission, somebody who made a pact with the devil. So I think that at the end of this book, you'll be left thinking, so what should I listen now? Well, you can listen also to music that is still positively tuned, because I also have a whole section dedicated to 432 rather than 440 hertz in the tuning of which is also an interesting topic. So I think that maybe for the next show we do together, you can go through the whole book. And then we can discuss in details maybe those, because today I gave you a very general overview of the whole book. I hope next time we can maybe go more in depth after you read it and you study it and you understand the importance and relevance of this book, which took me many years of research and of work, of personal experience, because it's also the personal experience which I had with some of the people that I mentioned, that also it's interesting, the fact that I was capable myself of meeting people like Boy George, the Pet Shop Boys, rather than the Dancers of Duran Duran or Wild Boys. People don't know Wild Boys. Wild Boys is a book of William Burroughs. Boy was the main characters in the book of William Burroughs. That's why Boy George launched even a fashion line with Boy. And the Pet Shop Boys, same thing, Boy. They went around and they were fans of Brian Gyson and William Burroughs. That's why I met them. And so even the most innocent forms of music, which usually are said to be superficial, like the 80s, in reality are not superficial at all. And if you go and study them in detail, they have a lot of occult stuff in them. So thank you so much for having me on.
I love talking to you, Leo, and absolutely, I'll get the book and I'll go through it. I've loved every book we've discussed so far, and you truly are one of the most fascinating people I've ever had on this show. And I will say, two superlatives: you are the best dressed guest, and you have the coolest accent. I'm so jealous of your accent. I know you make fun of it, but I love your accent. I think it's so cool. I wish I had it. But yeah, I love it, man. You've poked fun at it before, Chef Boyardee, but I love it. It's great to listen to. I wish I wish you would narrate your books. If you ever put those like made audiobooks, you would be such a great narrator. It would be
Well,
so incredible.
it might be an interesting option, maybe in the future. Who
Do
knows?
it, do
I think
it.
that the problem is that when we're talking about 700 pages book, it's like it will take a long time to make
Yeah,
such a issue.
it would be worth it. It would be
It will be
worth
worth
it.
it, but it will take a long, long time to get
It
it.
would. It would. I mean, it would be, but it would be fantastic.
I think that in this experience of mine of writing all these books, this was the book that I wanted to really also be more careful with the content of,
Okay.
because here we're talking about people who are most of them, I mean, not all of them, are not historical characters or the Fritz Lang of the situation, but most of the people in this book are still alive and kicking. They're still part of the show business world, from Brad Pitt to Madonna to the Rolling Stones to Paul McCartney. So when you write about these people, you have to be extremely accurate. Otherwise, you can risk lawsuits. You can risk provoking some unwanted situations. That's why with this book, I really wanted to be accurate, and I also wanted to give credibility to the idea that there is a conspiracy in the show business, because I personally, from the books that I read before, that I managed to check out before I started my own book, I never really found anything that was satisfying, because they were all too general or hypothetic. This, okay, Katy Perry said this about the Illuminati, this other guy said this about the Illuminati, this other guy loves Satan but maybe he doesn't. No, we need the facts, and the facts that are relayed on this book are accurate, and this should give the possibility to the readers also itself, because in my book, sorry,
You're good.
that I have some here with the mic. Sorry.
You're good.
Oh, we should be okay. We should be on it.
Yep.
Okay. So my intention was to finally give also the opportunity to shield yourself. So there is a way of listening to music. There's a way of viewing films. There's a way of interacting with show business without being harmed from it, which I try to explain during the whole course of the book, not only denouncing this whole world, but also teaching you how to shield yourself, your children, the younger people who are unfortunately the victims of the Satanism that we see paraded now in front of us at the Grammy Awards, or all the way to the Rihanna dancing in the middle of a game, which should be only entertainment, but is not any longer entertainment, because their interest is to brainwash everybody and make them accept the normality of the ideology of the Antichrist. Mm. We went from the conservative family portrayed on TV in the 50s to the family of today, which is a non-family, There is no family. There is not, we went from the classic family that will sit around the table and have a meal to these families of people who are in front of their kids are in front of the smartphone all day. They don't even talk to each other. One thinks he's a man, the other thinks he's a woman, but he's born a woman, then he's they're confused. A lot of them want to suicide themselves. There is a growing number of young people who simply can't take it any longer and just suicide themselves. So instead, then killing yourself, why don't you learn the roots of the problem and find a solution for you and your friends, your family? Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thank you, Leo. I will send you an email after this, and we'll schedule the next one, and I'll grab the book, I'll read it, and I can't wait to talk to you again after having read it.
Absolutely, because as you know, every time we have done that, every time you have literally gone very much in depth through the books I previously discussed with you, you have done an excellent work also in
Thank you, sir.
highlighting certain aspects. Now, I tried today to highlight what is the general content of it all, but I'm sure that you will be able to maybe highlight other elements. And so thank you so much for having me on today, and we will see each other in the future for this in-depth, how you want to call it, further discovery of volume 8.
Yes,
Thank you
sir.
so much. God
I
bless
look
you.
I look forward to it. God bless you too. Thank you so much, Leo. I'll email you. Thank you, sir. Guys, go grab the books in the description. Go check out his website, all that good stuff.